bypassed Nairobi as a discussion in recent days. Reports confirm the worst fears of many, that Kenya and Nairobi City in particular has scored poorly in traffic.
Yani kwa ujumla inapenda zile sensational stories. Kwa hiyo na wanahabari nao, kwa sababu nao wanapenda kuandika habari za namna hiyo ambazo zinakuwa zinapewa kipaumbele pia hata na news editors au wahariri wa vyombo vya habari. Kwa hiyo pia inakuwa ni changamoto kubwa kwa waandishi ambao wanaandika masuala ya kisayansi.
There's something about dynamics of the news market that if you have a page one story about science, it won't sell. People want stories about personalities. They want stories about big characters. They want stories about the big boys.
Issues of the environment are largely marginalized. They don't usually form part of the mainstream coverage unless a disaster happens or there's a major political statement.
For instance, we do research on cassava. Farmers get around 6 tons per acre. Yet when you use research, you use the right varieties and you use the right farming practices, you can get up to 40 tons per hectare. But now once our scientists come up with these technologies need to get to the farmers. And that's where journalists play a very important role.
African countries now are intensively participating in the road toward technological innovation. I'm thinking of oil and gas exploitation in East Africa, geothermal development in Kenya, expansion of technologies of information and communications.
Science is part and parcel of life.
For our nations to grow and reach that standard of the developed world, we need science and technology.
I'm a strong believer that science is the driving force for socio-economic development.
But the science won't get done, and options needed to provide the right decision-making frameworks won't be enriched or informed unless the general public and policymakers are part of that process. And to be involved in a meaningful way, they need accurate information. That's where science writers come in. They're a crucial piece of the puzzle of engaging science with development issues.
D'abord, la part réservée à l'information scientifique est négligeable.
At the time of the formation of MESHA, many organizations were looking for journalists whom they could work with to propagate issues of science. And this was at a time when there were a lot of workshops that were ongoing. Issues of climate change were coming on, issues of environmental degradation were coming out. Yet there was no organized group or team of journalists who could work together, talk together, and report effectively on issues of science. So we were looking for a team of journalists who would work together. People would share sources, people would share story ideas, because we were looking at science being the driving force behind every economy, and this was lacking. So we decided as journalists and communication officers that it was high time that we came together, and this we did in 2005.
Science journalists play a catalytic role of presenting research results in ways that are accessible to the public, whether it's informing the public about outbreaks like Ebola, informing debates around GMOs or climate change.
Yes, science journalism will help people overcome diseases when they are informed. Science journalism will help policymakers allocate money so that we don't depend on other people making for us bicycles, things like that. So we are able to thrive in a modern world. We don't live in what I call imported modernity. Science journalism can make somebody know I should boil water before I drink it. Science journalism can make somebody know I can buy certain chemicals which can do for me 1, 2, 3 so the plants can grow faster.
A lot has to do with some deliberate effort to change the landscape of science journalism in Africa.
First and foremost, you need to be a good journalist. I tell people that. A good journalist who applies their interest. Interest is the key word for me. A good journalist who is interested in an issue will ask, what is it? What does it do? Whom does it help? Who did it? Who needs it? A good journalist.
There is a need now to promote these journalists associations dealing with the specific areas such as science, technology, environment, and to promote specialization among journalists. I think this will promote reporting on these neglected areas.
It takes a journalist to educate the populace on every aspect of life. If African journalists receive adequate training on science, there will be no story that a science journalist will not tell about whatever aspect of research that scientists are undergoing.
Effective engagement with any group of people requires that you have some visibility, and so we must start somewhere. What we've started in Measure is through having meetings, congresses and conferences where we call upon policymakers to come and talk to science journalists. This way we are making inroads into various parliamentary committees that engage in agriculture, health and other sciences.
To us, we see you as a key stakeholder in creating awareness and popularizing science, technology and innovation.
It's important and an opportune time to renew contacts for everyone here and discuss problems and mutual interests with delegates from across the region. I wish to request that we all reflect on where we want to move in future. In telling the science story, in Kenya we usually say the story of Wanjiku, meaning that a story simplified, a science story simplified that my grandmother can understand. We need to reflect that on these 3 days.
Let me use also this opportunity to commend the organizers for this conference, for creating a platform for dialogue. I do consider the media as real partners in health. If the media, the journalists are well informed, can take the messages out there in a responsible manner.
The French embassy here in Kenya fully shares Measure's goals, and we are glad we could work together. Specific professional training for science journalists in matters of audiovisual and the techniques and methodology, and we are already open at the French embassy to do so.
On behalf of the International Federation of Agriculture Journalists, welcome to this Congress. I'm very happy to be here because the task of agriculture journalists will be very huge the coming years. Farmers have to produce food, feed, fuel, fish, flowers, fun on the countryside, pharmaceutical products, even fertilizers. But journalists have not to tell them how they have to do that. Journalists have to bring the information together in the right way. Economical, technical, political, even emotional information.
Brought us together as science journalists from across the continent, scientists and researchers from across Africa.
The fact that they are bringing journalists from other African countries means information from here will also reach in the rest of the parts of Africa.
This is very, very important for science journalism to grow. To share those experiences is very, very key.
Measure works with the National Commission on Science, Technology and Innovation. We are giving visibility among scientific innovations. This way, we feel that we are going to meet the critical mass that can come out and articulate and actually understand and appreciate the role of science and science journalism for that matter.
So it's important for me as a communications person to work with journalists to get to understand the results of our research, the technologies that we are developing, and then communicate them in a way that the farmers can understand, the policymakers can understand, the private sector can understand, and these technologies are rolled out.
Relationships are critical. Personal and professional links between researchers, decision makers, journalists, the general public. Those things are all decisive in affecting the nature and the success of influence that you have on policy. But to have that influence be effective, then there has to be local ownership of research findings. That's why IDRC funds research that's locally driven and locally used, and that's why we think science journalism is critical in the process of creating that local ownership. It's been a long journey for IDRC supporting science journalism. I've begun over 10 years ago. My colleague Jean-Marc Ferry in Ottawa, working with the World Federation of Science Journalists.
The Ministry of Education, Research, Science and Technology has been very good. They have collaborated with Measure all through. The National Council for Science and Technology has really collaborated with Measure all through. In fact, they facilitated them in very many cases. They would hold their meetings at the National Council for Science and Technology, which is good.
Over time, we have mentored a lot of journalists, upcoming journalists, who are now award winners writing science stories.
I wrote of a story of a young man doing dairy farming. He got a dairy cow as a present from his father. And just as a joke, the man just started doing dairy farming to a point where it became now a serious venture for him, to having around 100,000 shillings in a month from his dairy farming. I think that was a big plus, because after that I remember people calling the newsroom and saying I would want to go and visit that young man. And I think that story inspired many more.
I have highlighted or popularized the stories on horticulture farming. This is farming of flowers, vegetables and fruits, where, like in the Rakanidi, people have come to know through our FM radio that they can do best on farming.
Hizi local media zetu huku, Musi FM, Mbaitu FM, hiyo information zote tunapata kutoka hapa. Na hata vile vile katika TV vile vile kuko na vipindi za ukulima.
We have one district in Uganda that is considered to be the most vulnerable district in the entire world with the rate of malaria infection. It's in one of the tributaries of River Nile. It is a swampy place. Mosquitoes are breeding all over. You even see these mosquitoes flying during daytime. I managed to explain how Anopheles mosquitoes transmits malaria. No, it's science. Then I went deep to this village, do the community story. I went to the hospital. I went to those swamps where the mosquitoes are breeding. The doctors were complaining, said when we send our requisition for drugs, they are not responding. So when I wrote this center spread with, miserable people who are admitted in the hospital, the drug authority immediately responded and took drugs there. So the doctors were like, from that time of your article, whenever we requisition, they bring us prompt drugs. So I felt somehow I have helped that community, because it was like they were being neglected.
I think one way that I have contributed is trying to speak in the language of ordinary people what scientists say in their technical language. And in a way it is helped for people to use science in development.
Over time, we have seen a lot of science stories being published in the media houses, and not just in terms of quantity, but also stories that have really gone up. So looking back 10 years, we are saying that we started small, we were thinking big. The journey is still on, but we have a lot of achievements, because now people are realistic of the science issues that surround them.
Then you need to train journalists in a way to be able to get science information to affect policy, to affect product, to affect lifestyle. That's the way to go.
The core thing of Measure is to promote science journalism, science communication for development. If they continue that business, they'll go a long, long way.